Marcus Carter had planned nothing more than a peaceful afternoon. After a long meeting at work, he stopped by his favorite coffee shop on the corner. A cozy little place that always smelled of fresh espresso and warm pastries. The soft hum of conversation mixed with gentle background music made it the perfect spot to unwind. Dressed in a crisp navy suit, he looked every bit the professional calm collected, and just waiting for his cappuccino. He scrolled through his phone, not paying much attention to the door, until it suddenly swung open with force. A police officer stepped inside, his boots heavy against the wooden floor, his eyes scanning the shop as if he was searching for someone. It took him only seconds to lock onto Marcus. Without a greeting, the officer strode over, stopping so close that Marcus could smell the faint trace of coffee and leather from his uniform. "Let's go. You're not supposed to be here," the officer said in a voice that cut through the chatter of the room. Marcus blinked, caught off guard. "I'm sorry, what?" he replied, trying to keep his tone polite. The officer's eyes narrowed. "Don't play games with me. This is for paying customers only." Confused, Marcus reached for the receipt in his hand and held it up, but the officer barely glanced at it. The shop grew quiet. Conversations faded, cups clinked softly, and a few heads began to turn toward them. The barista behind the counter looked concerned, but before she could say anything, the officer added, "I know trouble when I see it." The words hung in the air like a bad smell, heavy with meaning. Marcus felt the shift in the room. What had started as an ordinary afternoon was now charged with tension, and all eyes were on him. The silence in the coffee shop grew heavier by the second. Every customer seemed frozen in place, their eyes darting between Marcus and the officer. Marcus kept his composure, though inside, a knot of frustration tightened in his chest. He held the receipt out again, this time speaking more firmly. "I am a paying customer," he said, his voice steady but edged with disbelief. The officer's expression didn't change. He waved the receipt away like it meant nothing. "Don't get smart with me," he replied coldly. "I know your type." The words were quiet, but they carried through the room like a slap. A woman sitting by the window gasped softly. At a table near the counter, a young man slid his phone out and started recording. The barista stepped forward, her voice nervous, yet determined. "Officer, he's a regular here. He hasn't done anything wrong." The officer's head snapped toward her, and his voice turned sharp. "Stay out of this." She froze, her hands tightening on the edge of the counter. Marcus could feel dozens of eyes watching him, some full of sympathy, others wide with shock. The air was thick with unease. The comfortable warmth of the café, replaced by a cold tension that pressed down on everyone. Outside, cars passed, and people walked by, unaware of the storm brewing inside. Marcus took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm. He had been in tense situations before, but this one was different. This wasn't about a case or a suspect, this was personal. The officer stood with his arms crossed, blocking the path to the door, as if daring Marcus to make a move. Every second that passed made the moment feel heavier. The quiet murmur of the coffee machines, the only sound breaking the stillness. Something had to give. Marcus stood perfectly still, his posture straight, his face unreadable. Years of experience had taught him that staying calm was often more powerful than raising his voice. Still, he could feel the pulse in his neck quicken, every muscle in his body tight with restraint. The officer shifted slightly, his stance aggressive, his hand hovering near his belt as if he was ready to escalate at the slightest provocation. "Is there a reason you're asking me to leave?" Marcus asked evenly, his voice calm but carrying enough weight to make the question feel deliberate. The officer smirked without humor. "You're making people uncomfortable," he said, glancing briefly around the room. But no one had complained. If anything, the only discomfort came from his presence. A man sitting near the back shook his head in disbelief, muttering under his breath. The young man recording moved his phone slightly to get a better angle. Marcus's eyes swept the room for a moment, taking in the scene, the frozen stares, the half-finished drinks, the tense silence. He realized this was no longer just about him. Every person here was witnessing the kind of treatment that often went unseen, and their silence was its own kind of testimony. He considered simply walking out, letting it end. But something deep in his chest told him this was the moment to stand firm. The officer took a step closer, close enough that Marcus could see the small creases at the corners of his narrowed eyes. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," the officer warned. Marcus didn't flinch. Instead, he slowly reached toward the inside of his jacket, his movements deliberate. His gaze locked on the officers. The tension in the room sharpened. Everyone seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. All eyes followed Marcus's hand as it slid slowly inside his jacket. The officer's body tensed instantly, his right hand hovering over his holster. His shoulders squared like he was preparing for a confrontation. The room felt frozen, the only sound the quiet hiss of steaming milk from the espresso machine. Marcus moved with deliberate care, pulling out a small black leather wallet and flipping it open in one smooth motion. A flash of gold caught the lighter polished FBI badge gleaming in the officer's face. The silence deepened, broken only by Marcus's voice, firm and unshakable. "Special Agent Marcus Carter, Federal Bureau of Investigation," he said, his eyes locked on the officer's. "Now, why don't you explain to me exactly why you're harassing a federal agent who's done nothing wrong?" The officer's jaw slackened, and for the first time since entering the café, he took a step back. A ripple of whispers spread across the room, a mix of shock and disbelief. The barista's eyes widened, her hand covering her mouth, while the young man recording tilted his phone to capture every detail. The officer stammered, his earlier confidence slipping away. I didn't know," he muttered, his voice low, almost swallowed by the tension in the air. Marcus didn't move, didn't blink. "It's not about knowing who I am," he said, his tone cutting through the heavy silence. "It's about how you treat people when you think no one can hold you accountable." The officer looked away, his face pale, his stance no longer threatening. The power in the room had shifted completely, and everyone could feel it. Marcus calmly closed the wallet, slipped it back into his jacket, and waited, letting the weight of his words sink into every corner of the coffee shop. The officer shifted uncomfortably, his earlier authority crumbling under the weight of the moment. His eyes darted toward the door, then back to Marcus, as if searching for a way out of the humiliation now hanging in the air. I didn't mean," he began, but Marcus cut him off with a calm, steady voice. "You meant exactly what you did. The problem is, you didn't expect anyone to challenge it." The quiet in the coffee shop was almost electric. Every customer seemed glued to the scene, their faces reflecting a mix of admiration and disbelief. The barista, still clutching a coffee cup in one hand, broke the silence. "Sir," she said softly to Marcus, "your drink is ready. It's on the house." Marcus gave her a small, appreciative nod and stepped forward to take it. The officer moved slightly out of his way, his shoulders slouched, his gaze fixed on the floor. As Marcus passed, he added one final line, his voice low but powerful enough for everyone to hear. "Respect isn't something you give based on skin color, it's something you give because it's right." A murmur of agreement swept through the café, and a few customers even clapped quietly. Marcus walked to the door without looking back, the warmth of the coffee in his hand a stark contrast to the cold tension that had filled the room minutes earlier. Outside, the sun shone brightly, the world continuing as if nothing had happened. But inside, the memory of what they had witnessed would stay with them. The officer lingered for a moment, before slipping out silently, his head down. For those who remained, the scene had been more than an argument. It had been a lesson in standing tall, speaking truth, and walking away with dignity intact. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and share. Subscribe to the Silent Side USA for more powerful stories that keep you hooked till the very end.